All right, guys, we got kind of a cool discussion topic today. Gavin and I are out here and we're just talking about different ideas. And one thing that came to mind was something that I get asked about a lot, and I especially get a lot of comments after a successful hunt, and that is, how do you stay calm during the moment of truth? And one caveat to that is I think I get just as excited as most people. I may just not show it as outwardly, especially after the shot. But I think it's such an interesting topic because to me it's very personalized. It's very much based on someone's personality, how they handle intense situations, things like that. And I do think there are some uncontrollable factors just based on who you are. But I do think there are some things that you can control as well and potentially improve. When we're talking about buck fever, we're usually referring to the negative kind, which is before the shot, something that could negatively impact your ability to get the job done and make a good shot on that animal. There's also that post-shot reaction, that emotion that flows through, and that's a good kind. I enjoy seeing that, especially in younger hunters or newer hunters. Seeing them experience something like that for the first time that we've all felt before. I'm all for them, all for that post-shot reaction, getting excited, as long as it's genuine. Of course, I don't want to see people doing it for show or for a video or something like that. I want it to be authentic. But before the shot, in my mind, you're better off not getting too high or too low. Don't get too excited, focus on the task at hand. And I think that's my answer to most people when I get asked that question, is just, I go into a hyper-focus mode. When I have a shooter animal coming into bow range and I'm getting ready to make a shot, it's business. It's a business-like event. I have a job to do. My job is to make an ethical shot on that animal, and that is all I'm focused on. And so a lot of that comes from confidence, and having done that and having been in that situation before and executed it. So the less you can think about that could go wrong, the better off you're gonna be. And just even mechanics, just what if situations, get all that out of your head. Like if a deer's coming in, you're thinking, well, I should probably aim low, he's a little alert, or on the range, I was shooting a little bit left. Get all that out of your head. Don't think about that type of stuff. Focus on what your job is. And that's basically how I communicate to people what I do. I go into this kill mode. I don't think about what's going on until after the shot. Then I can process it. Then I can look back on it, I can celebrate whatever. But before the shot, it's just focus on what I have to do to make a good shot on that animal. As I said before, I do think this is a little bit personalized and individualized because it's somewhat a reflection of your personality too. For example, I consider myself to be pretty reserved, pretty even-keeled. I try not to get too high or too low in certain moments. And I think back to, like, even growing up, I played sports all throughout my childhood, all the way through college. And my dad and coaches would always talk about this. I'm sure you've heard it before, but they would say things to our team like, act like you've been there before. And that's always kind of stuck in my head. It's an act of confidence. Sometimes it's applied to like celebratory situations, kind of remaining respectful and stuff, but it also applies to preparation situations and before a big moment. Act like you've been there before, have the confidence to go get the job done. And that's kind of how I operate, is act like I've been there before. I know I can get that job done. So again, it reflects on that confidence. And one physical thing that I think you can do to increase that confidence, of course, being confident with your bow on the range, but it's a lot of times a much different mentality when you're shooting at a live animal. So for that reason, every single year I kind of relearn what it's like shooting at a live animal. So early season, I try to shoot a lot of does. Just seeing that arrow go where you want to, putting a clean, ethical shot on it, even if it's a doe, builds a ton of confidence in your head. So when you get that opportunity to buck later in the season, you've been there before. You've done that, you've done it well, and you don't have to worry about what could happen. Again, the more worries and what ifs and things you have going on in your head, the more likely you're gonna mess it up yourself. That lack of confidence is never a good thing in this type of situation. So besides getting meat in the freezer early in the season, it's a huge preparing factor for me, just to build that confidence of executing a good shot on a live animal. So that's the main physical thing I think you can do to help, other than practice on the range, of course, but the rest of it in my mind is mental. And so figure out what works for you. For me, it's block everything out and have a hyper focus on the event. Other people, sometimes they have something that they say in their head to keep them in the moment. Sometimes it's a breathing thing. Figure out what works for you. I'm interested to hear different people's takes. Like for example, we aired a segment a few weeks ago with Justin from Missouri, and he's got a little mantra that he says in his head to keep him in the moment and keep him focused. So I'm really anxious to hear from the other guys, but also you guys as well. Again, I think it's very individualized, and people are going to have their own little systems, and you guys comment, share what you do, or things that have helped you might help someone else. So appreciate you guys joining this week. I'm going to turn it over to the other guys.
What a fun topic to be discussing. Buck fever is probably one of the things I feel like I do the worst as far as managing it. It's something like probably a lot of the guys have said, I'm getting better over time. And there's a few things that I'll share that have helped me along the way. A lot of it's just repetition, but I'll break it down between things I do before I head to the woods and then things I do in the moment of truth. The first thing that has helped me a ton, and it kind of applies more to the off season than in season, and that's just taking meaningful practice reps. And what I mean by that is not necessarily shooting big groups of arrows at one particular distance. I think it's, like I said, it's gone a long way in helping me seal the deal in that moment of truth. And so what I do a lot of times, I'll take one arrow, and if I shoot a group of three, I'll shoot at three different distances, and I'll kind of just maybe toss the arrow in the yard and get out there and shoot one at each distance. So that way I'm just not necessarily working on my form in that moment. It's not that repetition as far as form goes, but it's really changing it up and kind of keeping things interesting, a lot like it happens in the woods. So that has helped me a ton. Going with that too, having confidence in your setup, I can't speak enough about. And so those are just a couple of things there. You know, I shoot a single pin sight, and I stepped toward that a few years ago, getting away from that multi-pin sight. For me, it's just mostly because of almost chaos in the moment of having to decide which pin. So I've gone to a single pin and catered my setup a little more to help me seal the deal. And then moving on to those actual hunts where the buck fever hits, the first thing I do when I get in the stand, after everything's set up, especially with all the camera gear, is I lay out everything I think I'm gonna need. And it may sound a little basic, but it really has helped me a lot. There's so much chaos it seems to be when you got a big buck coming in. But the last thing I want to be doing is scrambling, looking for my grunt call or my rattling horns or my binos or rangefinder. So I do take that couple extra minutes of time when I first get in the tree. I lay everything out, whether it's my grunt call around my neck or my rangefinder in my pocket. I do it the same every single time I head to the woods. And that really does help a ton, you know, making sure that when that deer does show himself, I'm ready to rock. I know where everything's at in case I need to make a call or whatever it may be. The next thing I do when that deer's coming in, and the first thing I usually do in that situation is I go ahead and stand up. I don't necessarily love shooting sitting down. I don't do a lot of practice shooting sitting down. So one thing I'd never want to have an issue with is getting stood up. That adds an extra 100 beats per minute to my heart rate, and I hate having to do that. So if I see a deer who I even think might be a shooter coming from 1,000 yards away, I go ahead and get stood up. And that actually has helped me in several instances. The last little bit of advice that I have, it's simple as well, taking those deep breaths when that deer is coming goes a long way of controlling your heart rate. That blood flow is pumping pretty good, at least on myself it is. So taking those deep breaths and calming everything down in the moment helps a ton. You know, a lot of times you have more time than you actually think. You know, in the moment you may think you've got to pull it off now, right now. And that's not always the case. A lot of times those deer kind of just meander through the woods or through a field and what it may be. So you have more time than you really think. And the final thing I'll leave you with, it's something that I've had to really adapt to over the last few years, and a lot of it helps with filming my hunts, making sure that the camera guy is always situated when I'm going to shoot a deer. And that's the simple fact of being okay with letting deer go. When I was younger and I first got into bow hunting in my teenage years, it almost felt like a crime to let a deer get out of there that was in bow range. And so unfortunately I made a lot of bad shots and missed a lot of deer just rushing it and trying to maybe feed arrows through windows and gaps that weren't quite right. And so over the last few years I think I've done a lot better with it, and especially talking to some of the guys here. You know, I really appreciate how Jared, Mike, Owen, some of the vets really do so well staying calm in the moment. And for me, a lot of times that means being okay with letting the deer go. You know, I have so much respect and appreciation for these deer that I'm hunting. So a lot like Grant said, buck fever, or deer fever in my case, is something I really never hope goes away. I love it, and if you've watched some of my hunts in the past couple years, a lot of times when a deer leaves, whether he gets shot or not, I got to sit down because I'm tore slap up. But that truly is what we live for. So I hope these couple of tips of mine help. Like I said, make those meaningful practice reps, be comfortable with your gear, shoot those does, and in the moment of truth, just take a second, take some deep breaths, and calm down.
I've had buck fever ever since I can remember, and one particular time that I can just think of is I was back hunting behind my parents' house on some public. It was a November morning. It was calm, it was crisp, and I could hear the leaves crunching behind me. So I stood up, grabbed my bow, and sure enough, it was this buck that I called Elmer. He came down to me right by the stand about 20 yards, and I tried pulling my bow back, and I was shaking so bad, and I had buck fever so bad that I couldn't even get halfway drawn on this deer. So I just had to watch this buck, the buck that I've been hunting for 3 years, go over the next ridge and out of my life, and that was actually the last time that I saw that deer. So a few ways that have helped me combat buck fever over the past few years is one is sitting in a stand location where I have a very, very large view of sight. It really helps me when I watch those bucks coming from hundreds of yards away, and I can make a game plan in my head of what's going to happen, kind of sizing them up and getting that time before they get to the stand to watch them really helps calm me down. I do a lot of self-filming, and I don't really grab the bow until that deer is within bow range really, just because I'm so focused on staying on focus with the camera on the deer. So if anyone out there is self-filming, that can really help you. Instead of worrying about the shot, just worry about the camera until that deer is right there at your feet. But ultimately, even if I wasn't filming, the thing that helps me the most is probably just focusing on where I'm gonna put that sight. The whole time that deer's coming in, all I can think about is where that shot's gonna be on that deer. Really, I don't believe that there's a really good way to prepare yourself mentally for a situation like that. A lot of us nowadays are hunting deer that we have a lot of history with. Some of those bucks might be 5 years of history, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like myself that there's a lot of emotion that gets wrapped up in this sport. And when you get an opportunity like that, it doesn't happen very often. So when he comes into bow range, I mean, emotions are going to be high, and it's just super important to slow it down and focus on one thing. And that one thing that I focus on is where I'm going to shoot this deer and take my shot, where I'm going to put the pin placement on it. If he's quartered away, where should I put it? But those are just a few things that have helped me over the past few years, and it's really calmed me down. That being said, I'll still be shaking like a dog when I see that buck initially, but when he comes into bow range, it's ice in the veins, and I'm ready to take care of business. So I hope those things help you guys, and we'll check with the other guys.
All right, well, buck fever is something that I've had to deal with pretty much ever since I started hunting. And I think anybody who knows me knows that I have not mastered buck fever whatsoever, but that's part of the fun for me. Watching that buck close the distance, coming to your tree, is an experience that you can't replace. So it's definitely part of the fun for me. And while I hope it gets better down the road, I hope it doesn't totally just disappear, because that's, like I said, it's something that I live for. So over the past couple of years, I've kind of figured out a few different ways to kind of calm my emotions during the moment of truth. And one of those, and probably my most important one, is when I draw back, just taking an extra couple seconds to really hone in on the exact spot that I'm trying to hit on that deer or that turkey or anything that I'm shooting at. I think a lot of times I just try to rush a shot, and I'll draw back, aim where I'm trying to hit, and then instantly just pull the trigger, and I end up pulling the shot or something like that. What I need to do, and what I've been working on, is when I draw back, just taking an extra few seconds to really mentally think about where I'm trying to hit that deer. And I think that's helped me a lot. I know this past season, when I shot my buck, I made sure I took my time with the shot, and it ended up being a great shot, and we watched him fall right there. So that's probably my most important tip that I just need to mentally think about during that moment of truth. And the second thing I do is try to put myself in those high pressure situations as much as I can. And this is a great time of year to do it during the off season, whether it's getting a bunch of your buddies out and creating a little backyard shooting competition, or even just going to your local archery league and entering in a league there. Anything to create a little competition, and you might not be able to mimic that situation of that big deer coming in and the feeling you get when he's coming in, but as long as you're getting out there and putting something on the line and creating those high pressure situations is going to help you a lot. So like I said, I hope buck fever never totally goes away from me, just because that's why I love to hunt, that feeling I get when that big buck is coming in and I know that I'm about to get a shot off. But I hope I control it at least a little bit to where I don't just black out when they're coming in. So I hope those 2 tips help you guys, and I encourage you guys to get out and start shooting.